In the roaring rail yards of 1890, a brakeman's handshake could cost him 2 fingers, or his life. 11,000 men a year vanished into a split-second gap, sacrificed for a $5 iron part the industry refused to replace. The safer solutions sat ignored while empty gloves piled up across the gravel. If life and limb came this cheap, how did America's most profitable business justify the cost? Let's step inside the kill zone and uncover the math that made loss a routine line on the ledger. At the heart of every freight yard stood the gap, the kill zone, where steel met steel and a man's timing meant everything. A brakeman faced 2 rolling boxcars, each weighing more than 20 tons. In one hand, he gripped an oblong iron link, 6 pounds of cold metal. In the other, he held a pin as thick as his thumb. The cars rolled toward each other, sometimes barely crawling, sometimes with a jolt that made the rails shudder. The job was to slip the link into the open jaw of one car, then guide the second car close enough for the holes to line up, all while the wheels kept turning. There was no pause and no warning bell. The only cue was the groan of iron and the hiss of steam. The brakeman had to step between the cars, 1 foot on the ballast, 1 hand steadying the link, waiting for the split second when the draw heads aligned. It was a maneuver like threading a needle in a thunderstorm. If he moved too soon, the link would miss the hole and the cars would bang together, sending the iron flying or jamming his hand. If he hesitated, the gap would close on his fingers, or worse, his entire arm. The pin had to drop at the exact instant the holes matched up. There was no second chance, no room for error. Eyewitnesses described the moment as a blur, a flash of movement, the clang of metal, then either the brisk walk away or the silent empty glove left on the gravel. The force was merciless. Even a slight miscalculation, a wet boot, a slippery grip, a car that jumped an inch could crush bone and erase a man from the roster. In the rain or under the glare of a lantern, the kill zone was always hungry. Every coupling, every shift, every yard across America repeated this choreography. The cost was measured in missing fingers, shattered hands, and men who simply vanished from the line. No badge, no flag, just the knowledge that the kill zone never forgave a mistake. This was the daily ritual for the 3-Finger League. Not a test of bravery, but a calculation of survival, played out thousands of times a day in the space between 2 moving walls of iron. The link and pin system demanded a human sacrifice for every train that left the yard. And the only thing standing between a brakeman and the ledger was the speed of his own hands. A single glove on the gravel says everything. It is not a badge, not a flag, not even a tradition. Just the leftover of a man who will not be finishing his shift. In the yards, hands told the story. The missing fingers, the twisted stumps, the way a man gripped his coffee cup with what was left. The nickname 3-Finger League was not a joke. It was a roll call of survivors, men who had paid in flesh just to keep working. The numbers behind those scars were staggering. Government tallies from the late 1880s and early 1890s show American railroads losing 2,000 men a year to coupling accidents alone. 20,000 more were injured, crushed hands, shattered arms, bodies caught between cars. These were not rare events. They were routine, written into the job description. Every morning, brakemen lined up for work knowing the odds. 1 in 100 would die that year. 1 in 8 would leave with some part of himself gone. The Interstate Commerce Commission tracked the toll, page after page of small print, names, dates, causes, most of them the same story. A man stepped into the gap, the cars closed in, and he did not get out in time. The link and pin system demanded it, over and over, thousands of times a day, in every yard from Boston to San Francisco. No memorials, no moment of silence. Just the empty glove, left behind as the rest of the shift moved on. There was always another man waiting to fill the dead man's shoes. The railroads kept hiring. The work never stopped. The cost, 11,000 lives and bodies lost each year, became just another line in the ledger. The 3-Finger League grew, not because men were careless, but because the machine was built with no forgiveness. In the end, the only mark left by most brakemen was a glove on the ground and a name crossed off the roster. Railroad accountants did not keep their eyes on the kill zone. Their gaze was fixed on the ledger. In the 1890s, a Lincoln pin coupler cost $5. The new automatic coupler, the Janney, with its handshake of steel, could cost $25. Multiply that by nearly 1 million freight cars stretching across the continent, and the price gap swells from a handful of coins to a mountain of capital. $5 million to keep things as they were. $25 million to make them safer. The difference, $20 million, was more than a line item. It was a year's rent for a city of families, the price of a suit for every brakeman on the line, or the entire annual payroll for a region's workforce. For the men in the boardrooms, the calculation was simple. The cost of doing business meant counting bolts and bodies in the same column. Every new car built, every old car in the yard, came with a choice: spend $5 and keep the system running as it always had, or spend $25 and erase the need for a man's hand in the gap. On paper, the old way looked efficient. The link and pin was cheap, familiar, and already paid for. The Janney was expensive, unproven at full scale, and would tie up the shops for months. Retrofitting 1 million cars meant pulling them out of service, slowing freight, and risking lost revenue in a business that ran on thin margins and fierce competition. The numbers were everywhere: vendor quotes tacked to the wall, fleet registers inked in careful script, cost comparisons passed from one desk to another. $5 for the old part, $25 for the new. $20 million to bridge the gap. In a time when $20 could cover a month's rent or feed a family for weeks, the price difference was not just a technical hurdle. It was a wall. Every dollar spent on safety was a dollar not spent on expansion, on dividends, or on the next round of rolling stock. The accountants saw risk in every extra expense, and the boardrooms weighed human loss against the bottom line with the same cold logic they used for steel and coal. So the calculation went on. The cost of doing business meant accepting that some men would not finish their shift. The empty glove on the gravel was just another entry, balanced against the savings from a $5 part. The ledger told the story: death was cheaper than prevention, as long as the numbers stayed in the black. The men who made these decisions never stepped into the kill zone themselves. For them, the danger was abstract: a number, a risk, a cost. For the brakeman, it was the difference between going home whole or leaving nothing behind but a glove and a name crossed off the roster. In the boardrooms, the cost of a man was a line item, not a story. The legal system made sure of it. The doctrine was called contributory negligence. If a brakeman lost his hand in the kill zone, all the company lawyer had to prove was that he had made a single misstep, a moment's hesitation, a wet boot, a glance the wrong way. That was enough. The courts would rule that he had contributed to his own injury. No damages, no compensation. The widow's claim died on the judge's desk. Railroad attorneys relied on more than one shield. The fellow servant rule let companies dodge responsibility if the accident was blamed on another worker. The assumption of risk doctrine said that by taking the job, a man accepted the danger. Every time a brakeman stepped between the cars, the law said he knew what might happen. The ledger absorbed the risk, and the courts closed the case. These doctrines were not rare technicalities. They were the foundation of the Gilded Age labor law. Case after case, the verdict was the same: the company owed nothing. Reports from the period show that successful injury suits were the exception, not the rule. Most families got nothing but a telegram and a set of dead man's tools. If a payout came at all, it was a token sum, barely enough to cover a funeral, never enough to replace a wage earner. In the rare event of a settlement, the numbers were so low that they barely registered against the company's annual profits. The result was a workforce that was, by design, disposable. The supply of labor was endless. Immigration, economic downturns, and the promise of steady work meant that for every man lost to the kill zone, 10 more waited at the yard office ready to sign on. The railroads did not have to worry about running out of brakemen. The empty glove on the gravel was just a signal to hire the next man in line. Inside the legal files, the language was cold and precise. Judges wrote that coupling was a well-known risk. Brakemen were expected to exercise constant vigilance. Any slip, any error was their own fault. The ledger, kept in careful script, recorded the cost of a new hire, not the cost of a lost life. The company's liability was a rounding error easily absorbed and quickly forgotten. This legal firewall was the hidden engine behind the blood calculation. It made the cost of prevention look extravagant and the cost of loss manageable. The system was not broken, it was operating exactly as designed. Human risk was priced into the business, and the law made sure it stayed cheap. The ledger ruled, and the kill zone kept its grip. Lorenzo Coffin arrived at the Burlington yards with a mission, not a theory. He was not an engineer or an executive. He was a farmer, preacher, and Iowa's first railroad commissioner, and he had seen too many men disappear into the kill zone. In 1887, Coffin convinced the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad to put the question of safety on trial, not in a courtroom, but on the rails themselves. The Burlington brake tests began with a string of freight cars, each instrumented for the experiment. Railroad officials, lawmakers, engineers, and reporters lined the tracks, notebooks in hand. The trains ran at speed, brakes slammed on, and the results were measured in feet, not anecdotes. Coffin insisted on side-by-side runs, one train with the old handbrakes and Lincoln pin couplers, another with Westinghouse air brakes and Janney's automatic coupler. The difference was immediate. Where the old system skidded and shuddered to a stop, the new one halted clean and short. For the first time, the numbers were public, not just stories from the yard. The press covered the tests as a spectacle, but Coffin treated them as evidence. He published the results, showing that the technology to end the slaughter already worked and worked better. Railroad executives who had always claimed the cost of safety outweighed the benefit now faced a new calculation. The calculated risk that once seemed like business sense was exposed as a choice, not a necessity. The ledger could no longer hide behind doubt. Coffin's zeal turned data into a weapon. Legislators who had heard years of excuses now held proof in their hands. The spectacle of the Burlington tests forced the industry to answer a simple question: how many more men had to be erased by a $5 part when the solution was already proven in daylight, in front of the nation? The evidence left no room for the old math. The kill zone's days were numbered. Congress put the matter to a vote in the winter of 1893. After years of hearings, testimony, and public outrage, the Safety Appliance Act became law. The text was blunt. Every railroad car in interstate commerce had to be fitted with automatic couplers, ones that would lock by impact and uncouple without sending a man into the kill zone. No more hands between moving walls of steel, no more excuses about cost or tradition. The law set a deadline, and it gave the Interstate Commerce Commission the teeth to enforce it. Any railroad that failed to comply faced fines for every car, every day. For the first time, the penalty for delay was spelled out in dollars and cents, and the government, not the company ledger, would set the price. The industry arguments about expense, shop time, and competitive ruin were swept aside. The law did not care if a coupler cost $5 or $25. It did not care how many cars needed retrofitting or how many men waited in the hiring line. The only numbers that mattered now were the ones in the statute: a specific date, a mandatory device, and a daily fine for every car left unchanged. The Interstate Commerce Commission was charged with inspecting yards, counting cars, and tracking compliance. Railroads scrambled to order new couplers, convert shops, and file for extensions. But for the first time, the ledger's logic had been flipped. Safety was no longer just a cost of doing business. Safety was the law. On the Commission's charts, the casualty line began to fall. The old, steady slope of loss, men erased, hands crushed, families broken, finally bent downward. The empty glove on the gravel, once a fixture in every yard, now seemed to hover over a declining graph. The state had forced the industry's hand, and the kill zone lost its grip. The price of a man's life was no longer set by the lowest bidder. Every safety latch and warning label today carries the ghost of that cold calculation, lives weighed against ledger lines. Workplace deaths in America dropped by over 80% after federal safety laws took hold, but corners still get cut when profit tempts risk. Progress is never free. Someone, somewhere, still pays the difference.